30 minutes into the blind date. A PhD graduate from a non-double first-class university, making 27,000 yuan a month, told me my 1.5 million yuan annual salary was nothing special. She said agreeing to meet me was already her lowering her standards. She also complained my apartment was only 120 square meters, and that after we got married I would have to buy another one right next door to her parents' place. I looked at her dead serious face and almost laughed out loud. Turns out some people are not here to find a partner. They are here to find a sucker. ... It was a Saturday. Aunt Chin had called me 3 times to nag me into going, so I finally drove to that western restaurant by the river. Aunt Chin was an old co-worker of my mom's. She had talked the woman up non-stop over the phone. Su Jiang has a PhD, she works in biotech R&D. Quiet, intellectual, good family background. You're 32 already. Stop being so picky. I was not trying to be picky. I just figured meeting in person was better than vetting each other like resumes over WeChat. Besides, she had already done her full round of vetting over WeChat before we even met. The day we added each other, she sent me a photo of her lab ID badge first. There was a string of English abbreviations under her name. Before I could even say hello, she asked what brand my car was. I texted back, Audi. She replied 2 minutes later, oh, fine for commuting I guess. Her second question, whether my apartment was still under mortgage. Third, how much my parents' pensions were, and whether they would need to live with us later. Fourth, she said she was usually busy and hated pointless meetings. So if our conditions were too far apart, there was no point wasting each other's time. Right then I thought she came off a little harsh. But Aunt Chin kept talking me into it. Highly educated people are just straightforward. Don't take it personally. It might be different when you meet in person. My mom said the same thing. Lots of girls are just guarded, it does not mean they are mean. I had just gotten off a project that day, my head full of spreadsheets, and I did not feel like playing word games over WeChat. She asked, I answered. At the end of it all she sent, fine, we can meet. Your baseline at least clears my minimum filter. I stared at that message for 3 seconds. I almost felt like I was not going on a blind date. I was going through a first-round job interview. But that is how people are sometimes. The more ridiculous something feels, the more you want to see just how ridiculous it can get. When I walked in, Xu Jiang was already there. White button-down, long black skirt, hair pulled back perfectly neat. An English language journal lay on the table, an iced Americano beside it, condensation dripping down the glass. She glanced up at me, first at my watch, then my shoes, and finally at my face. Like she was inspecting goods. I sat down and smiled. Sorry, traffic was bad on the way. She nodded. Understandable. High commuting cost for urban middle class. It is just reality. My hand froze halfway to the menu. This did not feel like small talk. It felt like she had already written out all the questions and was just waiting for me to fill in the blanks. The server came over to take our order. I ordered a steak and soup. She only got a salad plus a cup of hot water. As soon as the server left, she got straight to the point. Let's get this out of the way first. My time is valuable and I do not care for pointless socializing. Fair enough. What do you do for work? Director of the second investment department at Hongsheng Group. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Hongsheng? The cultural tourism real estate one? That's right. She finally closed her journal. How big is your department's portfolio? I looked at her and almost laughed again. First question on a blind date, not about hobbies, not about family, about the size of my department's portfolio. I focus mainly on cultural tourism real estate projects. Between active and reserve projects, the total portfolio is around 1.3 billion yuan. She nodded like she was mentally taking notes. Decent, she said the word so lightly, like she was squeezing a tomato at the market, deciding it was passable but she could do better. I closed my menu and said nothing. I suddenly wanted to see just how much more absurd she could get. She took a sip of hot water and went on. What's your education background? Master's in Finance, Nanjing University. Nanjing University, huh? She drew the words out. Originally my standard was only graduates from the top 7 universities. Tinghu, Peking, Fudan, Shanghai Jiaotong, USTC, Zhejiang, Nanjing. I don't really look at others. Nanjing's a 985. I know some people call it a little Tsinghu or Peking, but there's still a gap. I straightened my knife and fork and said nothing. She seemed to take my silence as awkwardness, and softened her tone a little. But I'll be 35 next year. The dating market is realistic. It's normal to adjust your standards accordingly. Agreeing to meet you means I'm being practical. I looked at her. She said it all so earnestly, like she was announcing a major strategic pivot. She even added, "Don't take it the wrong way. I'm just a direct person." I smiled. "It's fine. Direct is good." She studied me for a couple seconds, probably surprised I was taking it so well, and pushed further. "What about your family situation?" "Only child. Parents are retired in good health. Not too much eldercare burden then." She nodded, then asked, "What's your career plan for the next 3 years?" Now I was actually amused. I looked up at her. "Do all your blind dates go like this?" Her expression didn't change. "Why not? We're both at this age. We can't just talk about star signs in movies, can we? Adult screening partners should look at core metrics." Core metrics. As soon as she said those 2 words, I got it. She wasn't here for dinner tonight. She was here to audit a resume. Car, apartment, education, parents, career prospects, going down the list one by one. Like I wasn't a person sitting across from her, just a product laid out on her table. I leaned back in my chair and played along. "What core metrics are you looking for exactly?" She finally smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. More like the look you give a resume that's worth reading all the way through. Income, platform, growth potential, family of origin, asset allocation, values. She paused. "And most importantly, whether you can match my level." Just then, the steak arrived. Steam curled up from the plate. I cut off a piece and ate it. I had a feeling this dinner wasn't going to be boring. Turns out I'd still underestimated her. After saying match my level, like she'd finally confirmed I was barely worth continuing the conversation, she actually started volunteering stories about her past blind dates. "I've turned down so many low-quality matches already." She prodded the lettuce on her plate with her fork, her tone casual. "A while back there was a civil servant making 300,000 a year. My parents thought stable was good enough. I talked to him for 20 minutes and lost interest. Too stuck in routine, no upward mobility. Then there was an entrepreneur. Claims he makes 2 million a year, but reeks of business hustle. Too calculating. I don't like people who are too good with numbers." I looked up at her at that. She acted like she didn't notice and kept going. "There was also a doctor at a top hospital. Decent education, but his lifestyle's a mess. Night shifts, reverse sleep schedule. He'd never be able to take care of the family." At that point she even added, "That's why I don't chase after fancy titles anymore. Fit matters more than prestige." I almost laughed out loud. What she called fit sounded like something else entirely. When you looked at the list, civil servant was too boring, entrepreneur was too money obsessed, doctor was never home. She wanted someone with lots of money, flexible hours, steady mood, always available when she called. And she had to frame it like she wasn't settling, she was just graciously lowering her standards a little. She sat there across from me, saying it all so casually. Like all those guys who didn't make the cut weren't real people. I set down my fork and suddenly realized this dinner probably wasn't going to end anytime soon. She asked, "What's your annual salary right now?" There it was. I put down my knife, wiped my hands with a napkin. Roughly 1.5 million before tax. She sat up a little straighter. Not from surprise. From shifting into formal evaluation mode. She looked at me and nodded. 1.5 million. Passable, I guess. I actually paused for a second at that. Not because I was hurt. I just genuinely didn't expect she'd say that to someone's face, like she was cow sizing up the heroes of the realm. I said passable. She was perfectly calm. "Yes. Don't get me wrong, it's not that it's too little. But from a marriage compatibility standpoint, there are lots of high net worth men in first-tier cities. The truly competitive ones make at least 3 million a year." After saying that, she even added helpfully, "Of course, I'm not saying you're not good enough. You just haven't hit my ideal upper limit yet." I stared at her for 2 seconds. There wasn't a trace of embarrassment on her face. It was a weird feeling, like an intern making 3,000 yuan a month earnestly telling you your new house has mediocre natural light. But she was so sure of herself. So sure that for a second you couldn't tell if she was faking it, or if she actually believed it. I picked up my glass and took a sip of water. Your ideal upper limit is pretty high. Can't help it. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I didn't study all these years just to end up worse off than everyone else. When she said that, there was a faint pride on her face. Like that PhD diploma was her price gun, and she got to set the value of everyone around her. I kept cutting my steak, and suddenly thought the rest of the food didn't need to come. Listening to her talk was filling me up enough already. Before we'd even finished our food, she'd moved on to apartments. Do you own property under your name? Yes. How big? 120 square meters, at Xiangguan Peninsula. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. 120 square meters is fine for one person, I guess. After saying that, she actually sighed. Like she was feeling sorry for me. I asked, how big do you think is appropriate then? At least an upgrade-sized unit. We'll have kids, elderly family coming over, we need quality of life. 120 square meters honestly is pretty cramped. I laughed. You think pretty far ahead, it's not thinking far ahead. She lifted her eyes. It's just what adults do, face the hard truths up front. She picked the cherry tomatoes out of her salad and pushed them to the edge of her plate. My parents and I have talked it over. Ideally, we'd buy another apartment near my family's place later. Preferably right next door to my parents so I can look after them icily. I looked up at her. Where do your parents live? West Side Keon Mansion. I knew that development. New, upscale, smallest unit starting at 180 square meters. Price per square meter was almost double what my current apartment cost. She didn't seem to pick up on the amused glint in my eye, and went on. It doesn't have to happen right away, of course. But if we're building a family together, the man should show that kind of sincerity. My parents raised me all these years. I'm not moving far away, and I'm certainly not struggling after marriage. She paused like she'd finally remembered to spare my feelings. Of course, on your current salary, pulling it off all at once would be a stretch, I admit. I looked at her dead serious face and almost laughed. I'd thought the most absurd line of the night would be passable, I guess. Turns out she was just getting started. She picked up her cup, blew on the hot water, and said airily, Oh, and my monthly salary isn't super high, but I work in R&D. This industry isn't about immediate income. If we hit a breakthrough, we could strike it rich overnight. So for the first few years, the man will have to carry most of the financial burden at home. That way I can focus on work that really matters. She said it loud enough for the table next to us to hear. A young couple who'd just sat down were there. The girl had been taking photos of her dessert, but she paused mid-shot. When she heard by another place, right next to my parents. Even the server bringing our food froze for a second, standing there with the tray. Like she wasn't sure if she should set down the cream of mushroom soup right now. Sujiyoung didn't notice any of it. She even looked at me earnestly and added, That's not too much to ask, is it? Marriage is a long-term partnership after all. Partnership. She talked about marriage like it was a procurement contract. I glanced down at the knife and fork on the table, then looked back up at her. Her expression was calm, even with a faint air of I'm being more than reasonable. In that moment, I finally understood just how generous Aunt Chin had been when she said this girl is just straightforward. This wasn't straightforward. This was unapologetically looking for a sucker. I set down my knife and fork. For the first time, I looked at her properly. Then I asked her one question. So, how much do you make a month? She lifted her chin. 27,000. I laughed. Not out of anger. It was the kind of laugh you get when something is so ridiculous you can't help it. I didn't hold it in. There was no point anymore. I looked at her. You make 27,000 a month, 300-something thousand a year. And you think my 1.5 million a year is just passable? Her expression faltered. Like it had finally occurred to her that she wasn't the only one allowed to ask questions at this dinner. But only for a second. The next second she set down her cup. That's not how you calculate it. She frowned at last. Like the test she'd been administering had suddenly decided to talk back. Then how should I calculate it? Income isn't everything. Scientific research has barriers, it has prestige. If my field delivers results, the value is nothing compared to investment banking. She said it smoothly. I bet she'd used that line more than once. I nodded. Fine, let's put the whole field thing aside for a second. Earlier you said agreeing to meet me was you lowering your standards. You said my apartment is too small, that I should buy another one next to your parents'. You said I have to carry the financial burden at first. Am I right to take that as, you say you don't care about money, but every single thing you say is about money? Her face darkened. I do not care about money. I just don't care about it in a vulgar way. I almost laughed out loud. That wasn't just twisted logic. That was straight up nonsense. When she saw me laugh, her tone turned cold at once. Do you think making 1.5 million a year makes you something special? No. Then what are you so upset about? I leaned back in my chair and said slowly, I'm not upset. I'm just saying this is the first time I've ever sat across from someone making 300K a year, earnestly telling me that 1.5 million a year is only barely passable. The tips of her ears went bright red. Not from embarrassment, from anger. That's just your male ego getting bruised. If that's how you want to take it, sure. Guys like you are all the same. You say you support successful women. But the second you meet someone who's actually on a higher level than you can't handle it. She said it sharply. Not hurt, just defensive, lashing out to save face. She wasn't done either. She leaned forward a little. I know why so many men get intimidated by PhDs. Because you all assume that in marriage a woman should be less accomplished, less aware, make less money, look up to you, feed your ego. But I'm not that kind of woman. I didn't spend all these years studying just to worship some guy who makes a little more money than me. Money is just the baseline. What really makes a marriage work is mindset, social circle, how high you stand to see the world. She went on, like she'd finally gotten the chance to deliver her whole dating philosophy. I admit my salary isn't top tier right now, but that's because research takes time to pay off. A lot of the value comes later. I'm looking at the ceiling, not the floor. You work in investments, you make cash flow. I work in R&D, I bet on future potential. We're not even playing on the same field. By this point, that unshakable certainty was back in her eyes. Like if she just stacked up words like research, social circle, mindset high enough, all her D's about houses, income, elder care, providing for the family would automatically sound more reasonable. She did not care about money. She cared about it a lot. She just wouldn't admit it. Had to dress up her calculations as vision, her pickiness as clarity. After that, I barely even felt angry anymore. I just thought it was absurd. She still genuinely believed the problem wasn't her double standards. It was that I couldn't handle a successful woman. I asked her, what makes you think you're on a higher level than me? Education, mindset, long-term potential, she answered quickly. Like she didn't even have to think about it. And she added, my understanding of marriage is more clear-eyed than most people's. I nodded. Your version of clear-eyed is, demand the man pay for everything. Demand he buy a house next to your parents. And then act like you're doing him a favor by lowering your standards to meet him. She stared at me, her eyes going cold. Chung Yan, that's a very cruel thing to say. I laughed. When you were grilling me for almost an hour, did you ever stop to think you were being cruel? She pressed her lips together, clearly unhappy. But she wasn't one to back down. She was used to being in the right, so even when she was caught off guard, she tried to regain the upper hand. I'm just stating the facts. Marriage is about combining resources, isn't it? You think my demands are high now, but women like me aren't supposed to marry down. She put extra emphasis on marry down, like she'd already made some huge sacrifice. When she said that, even the guy at the next table who'd been scrolling on his phone looked up at her. I looked at her and suddenly decided the dinner hadn't been a total waste. At least I'd seen firsthand how someone can twist anxiety, superiority, calculation, and self-pity all together. Then serve it up solemnly on a blind date. I asked her, then why are you still sitting here? She blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? You said someone with your credentials shouldn't marry down. So why are you here having dinner with a man what hour? Oh, only makes 1.5 million a year, lives in a 120 square meter apartment, and only went to Nanjing University? All the color drained from her face just like that. I didn't stop. It's not that you lowered your standards. It's that you found out, the guys who actually are as good as you imagine, they don't buy this act of yours. So you come here, wrap up your own insecurities as high standards, and wait for some nice guy to foot the bill. She stared at me, her eyes red with anger. You're completely unreasonable. The composed mask finally slipped. Her voice even cracked a little. I nodded. Good. Then we agree, we're not right for each other. I stood up and grabbed my coat. She froze for a second, then stood up too. Chung Yan, what is this? I looked down at her. Exactly what it sounds like. You're leaving? What else am I gonna do? Sit here and listen to you plan how to spend my money? Her voice rose. Guys like you are just so self-absorbed. You can't stand it when someone points out your flaws. I looked at her and I wasn't angry. At this point, I really wasn't. When something is ridiculous enough, you can't stay mad at it. You just want to get away. I set the bill down on the table. Shujiang, it's not that your standards are too high. It's that your head is in the clouds. Her face twisted with anger. What did you say? I said having standards isn't the problem. Dressing up your own anxieties as someone else's failing is what's ugly. She opened her mouth, probably about to fire back. But I didn't give her the chance. And one more thing. I looked her dead in the eye and said it clearly. That advanced degree? You earned it. It's not a weapon to hold over people. With that, I turned and walked out. I could still hear her high heels clicking on the tile floor behind me. Fast, sharp, frantic. She took a few steps after me, then stopped. I pushed open the door and the river wind hit me square in the face. Cool, bracing. I'd just reached the curb when my phone buzzed. It was Aunt Chin. She'd probably timed it, asking how the date was going. Before I could reply, the glass door of the restaurant swung open again behind me. Shu Jiang stepped out in her high heels, looking even angrier than before. She stood on the steps and shouted after me. Chung Yan, people like you only know how to throw your income around to feel superior. Two men waiting for designated drivers by the roadside both turned to look at her. She only looked more flustered and added, You think you're such a catch? I've met dozens of guys just like you. I didn't turn around. I just typed a message to Aunt Chin, not a match. I'm heading out first. After sending it, I got in the car and closed the door. Through the window, I could still see Su Jiang standing in front of the restaurant, holding her phone, presumably firing off voice messages to someone. Her face was dark with rage, her mouth moving a mile a minute, like she had to salvage every last scrap of her pride before she left. But some things once said can never be taken back, and she was the same way. Her dignity had already fallen on the floor, and she just had to grind it into the dirt with her high heels. I thought that was the end of it. But the next morning, Aunt Chin called me. The second I picked up, her voice was tight with suppressed anger. Xiao Chung, what on earth did you say to Su Jiang yesterday? I was on a break between meetings, so I stepped over to the window. What's wrong? She sent me a dozen voice messages first thing this morning. Called you arrogant, full of yourself, said your income's nothing special and you're just mad she's practical. She said all these accomplished women get held back by guys like you with fragile egos. I didn't say anything. Aunt Chin huffed a laugh, already amused despite her anger. I tried to smooth things over at first, but the more she talked, the more ridiculous she got. She said your annual salary is barely above average, and she never would have agreed to meet you if she wasn't getting older. I leaned against the window and finally laughed. What did you say back? I asked her if 1.5 million a year isn't good enough for you, then how much do you make a month? She didn't answer. Just started going on about how women in research shouldn't be defined by their income. Aunt Chin paused and lowered her voice a little. Xiao Chung, honestly? I made a mistake introducing her to you. This isn't the first time she's pulled this. What do you mean? That civil servant guy, making 300K a year. She said he had no ambition. The guy who runs his own company? Too mercenary, she said. The doctor? It's too many night shifts, no time for her. She's not looking for a partner. She's looking for some perfect sucker to cater to her every whim. I was quiet for 2 seconds. Aunt Chin went on. The worst part is, every time it falls apart, she blames the guy for not appreciating an educated woman. Honestly, she's given me a complex at this point. Before she hung up, Aunt Chin sighed. This one's on me. I'll take you out for dinner sometime, make it up to you. I told her not to worry about it. I'd already processed the whole thing on my own. I just didn't expect there'd be more that afternoon. Aunt Chin sent me a screenshot from a group chat. It was a small group for matchmakers. Shu Jiang had sent a message. Some men these days get a little money and get so full of themselves. They don't deserve a truly accomplished woman. Someone replied, "You mean that director from Hongsheng Investment you met yesterday?" She wrote back, His conditions are pretty average, honestly. I thought that was about it. But then Aunt Chin sent a dozen more screenshots. I tapped through them and realized it wasn't just one message. It was a full-on meltdown. Shu Jiang had sent a long voice message that transcribed to 4 or 5 full screens. Basically, she was just screening partners normally. Her demands were reasonable, and I was just a fragile man who couldn't handle an educated woman having standards. She also said my income wasn't particularly impressive, my mindset was totally average. And the only good thing about me was that I made a little more than most guys. Someone in the group asked her, "By average, do you mean 1.5 million a year is average?" She replied quickly, "To me, yes. I'm choosing a lifelong partner, not someone to just split rent with." The group went quiet for half a minute. Then another matchmaker, Aunt Jo, spoke up. "How much do you make a month then?" Shu Jiang replied a few seconds later, "You can't judge research work that way." Aunt Jo asked again, "I asked how much you make a month." The group went quiet again. This time Shu Jiang didn't answer directly. She just said, "Income isn't the only measure of my worth." That's when Aunt Chin finally snapped. She sent a long message. "If 1.5 million a year is average, then what do you call 27,000 a month? You complain his 120 square meter apartment is too small, but at least he owns a home, a car, and has a solid career trajectory. You say you don't care about money, but every single thing you say is about money. If you're such a catch, why are you still going through matchmakers?" She wasn't done. She added right after, "We set you up with a civil servant, no ambition, you said. A business owner, too mercenary. A doctor, too many night shifts. A teacher, not good enough platform. Now you've finally agreed to meet someone, and you say his income is barely passable. Are you looking for a husband, or are you auditioning emperors?" Someone in the group chimed in right away. "It's not that she has high standards. She just acts like she's the client and everyone else is pitching to her." Another aunt put it even more bluntly. "At least actual clients pay for themselves. She wants someone else to foot the bill, and then thank her for gracing them with her attention." I stared at my screen and almost laughed out loud. Su Jiang tried to do damage control after that. Said she wasn't materialistic, she just had high standards for marriage quality. That truly accomplished women should screen partners from a higher perspective. Aunt Chin sent one final line. "If you were really standing that high, you wouldn't still be here in this group complaining about guys' fragile egos after every blind date." After that, no one said a word. Almost a minute later, Su Jiang left the group. I stared at my phone for a long time. Spot on. Acting like you're the client isn't the problem. The problem is when your budget can't back up the attitude. I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 days later, my mom found out too. She was cutting fruit in the kitchen, and she asked me over her shoulder, "That PhD girl Aunt Chin set you up with, is there something wrong with her?" I was replying to an email, didn't look up. "How'd you hear about it?" Aunt Chin was furious. Called me and ranted for half an hour. Said in all her years matchmaking, she's never had a woman get her blood pressure up like this. My mom handed me a slice of apple. "She really told you to buy another apartment right next to her parents'? And she complained your 120 square meter place is too small?" My mom scoffed. "Why didn't she just ask you to buy her parents a penthouse with an elevator and cover their retirement too?" I couldn't help it, I laughed. My mom sat down across from me and asked, suddenly serious, "Were you angry?" I thought about it. A little at first. Not anymore. Why not? Because she wasn't really mad at me. She's just desperate. My mom frowned. Desperate for what? I twirled the glass in my hand and said slowly, desperate to prove she hasn't lost value. The older she gets, all those guys she turned her nose up at before, she has to say she just didn't want them. She has to keep being picky, keep acting like she's too good for everyone, so it doesn't look like everyone else is passing on her. My mom was quiet for a while, then pushed the fruit plate closer to me. So basically she's just insecure. I smiled and picked up another piece of apple. Something like that. After that, my mom didn't tell me to be the bigger person. She just pushed the fruit plate a little closer. The message was clear. Stay away from people like that. That night, a friend asked me about it. After he heard the whole story, he laughed so hard he almost slid off his chair. Chung man, that wasn't a blind date. That was due diligence for an acquisition. I set down my wine glass. Pretty much. You feel ripped off? Cost of a meal, learned a lesson. Worth it. He clicked his tongue. You're so calm about it. If it were me, I would have asked her right then. Where does a 27K salary get off calling 1.5 million average? I smiled. I did ask her that, and said she works in R&D, so you can't judge her by salary. My friend slammed the table and laughed harder. Well then you didn't lose fair and square. That level of circular logic? Normal people don't stand a chance. I finished my wine and didn't say anything. Not because I didn't have anything to say. I just realized everyone you tell this to thinks it's insane. Half a month later, Aunt Chin talked me into meeting another one. Before I went, she kept reassuring me. This one's normal, I promise. Don't let one bad experience put you off forever. I told her I wasn't put off. I just wasn't that excited about it. But when I met Shenzi, I realized how rare a normal conversation really is. She was a hospital pharmacist. She smiled when she saw me, said sorry I had to deal with traffic. Before ordering, she asked if I had any dietary restrictions. She didn't grill me about income, just said her job was steady, not too many night shifts, and she liked going hiking on weekends sometimes. When I brought up my job, she just nodded and said, investment banking must keep you busy. You must deal with a lot of pressure. No decent, no passable, no questions about my 5-year career plan. Halfway through the meal, she asked, have you had some really bad blind dates before? I looked up at her. Is it that obvious? She smiled, her eyes crinkling. Every time the subject comes up, you look like you just survived a natural disaster. I laughed too. For the first time, I realized how easy it feels when both people on a blind date treat each other like actual human beings. When we left, I offered to walk her to her car. She shook her head. No need, I parked just around back. She took a few steps, then turned back. For what it's worth, this was nice. Even if we don't see each other again, at least you're normal. I stood there in the wind watching her drive away, and suddenly thought of that dinner 2 weeks before. Same thing, a blind date. One person was calculating how to absorb your entire life into hers. The other just asked if you were tired, if you were busy. The difference was almost funny. Shenzi and I met again after that. It wasn't planned, just a casual, ordinary encounter. I'd been called into a last-minute meeting downtown that day, and it didn't end until 9:30 at night. The second I turned my phone back on, I saw a message she'd sent half an hour earlier. Are you still busy? I just got off night shift. I passed that congee shop on Southgate Road. The seafood congee's pretty good. Want me to bring you a bowl? I stared at the message for a few seconds, suddenly lost in thought. On every blind date I'd been on before, it always felt like everyone was racing to sell themselves, cram in education, income, property, family background, values, and 10-year plans all into one single meal. Like whoever paused first lost. But Shen Z wasn't like that. There was no testing, no calculation in her message. It just felt like she'd asked on a whim. I sent her my address. 20 minutes later, she actually showed up with the congee. She was wearing a dark blue coat, her hair a little messy like she'd come straight from her shift. There were faint dark circles under her eyes, tired from work. She handed me the takeout container. Drink it while it's hot, or it'll get fishy. I took it. The warm box seeped heat into my palm. The wind was sharp down by the building entrance. She stood at the bottom of the steps, hunching her shoulders a little against the cold. Did you come all this way just to bring me kanji? I asked. She smiled. Not entirely. Mostly I wanted to check, make sure you didn't have permanent trauma from that terrible blind date last time. I laughed too. I think I'm almost over it now. She nodded. Good, there are still plenty of normal people out there. Don't write off the whole species just yet. I looked down at the kanji in my hands. All at once, the warmth seemed to travel up from my fingertips, settling soft and warm in my chest. She didn't stay long. Said she had to be up early for work the next day, waved and left. I stood there watching her turn the corner out of the complex, the seafood kanji in my hand still steaming. It hit me then, slow and quiet, that being a good match doesn't have to be some grand, mysterious thing. It doesn't have to be dazzling or perfectly high-end. It's just, when you're swamped and stressed and burnt out, there's someone who asks if you want something warm to eat. Aunt Chin mentioned Shu Jiang to me once later on. Said she was still going on blind dates. Still picky. But fewer and fewer matchmakers were willing to set her up. No one wanted to deal with the drama. I didn't feel much when I heard it. Some people feel so loud and infuriating in the moment, but looking back later, they're just a silly, absurd little blip in your life. What stuck with me wasn't her saying 1.5 million a year was barely passable. It was the unapologetic, earnest look on her face when she said it. Like she truly believed she wasn't picking a partner. She was granting someone a favor. I figured it out eventually. She wasn't looking for a partner. She was looking for something to prop up her pride, to keep her dignity from crumbling completely. As long as she could sit across from people on blind dates and nitpick, talk big and hold herself high, she could keep lying to herself. It's not that no one wants me. It's that I refuse to settle. But the worst thing you can do on blind dates is act like you're the examiner. If you spend too long judging everyone else, you forget the person sitting across from you is judging you right back. After that, Shenzi and I met a few more times. No interrogations. No scorecards. When I was working past 11 at night, she'd send a message, "Don't forget to eat something when you're done." When she was on night shift, I'd drop by with a cup of warm soy milk on my way. Neither of us ever brought up compatibility or checklists. Once she was eating a pastry in the car, and the flaky crust got all over her hands. She laughed at herself first. I handed her a napkin. She wiped her hands as she said, "Don't look at me. I have zero dignity once I'm off work." In that moment, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. That's what easy, comfortable connection is, I realized. It's not about performing perfectly, or having all your credentials in order. It's about not having to put on a show around someone. Not having to wonder if they're secretly grading you in their head. So now when people ask me what I learned from that blind date, I usually just say one thing. Of course you can talk about practical terms in marriage. But if someone opens their mouth with nothing but standards, and every thought is a calculation, and they can't even show basic respect, that's not having high standards. That's turning life into a business transaction. And the thing I'm most glad about? I didn't stay to finish that dinner. Some people, every extra minute you spend sitting across from them leaves you feeling like you need to wash off the bad luck when you get home. Dating and marriage should not be treated as business bidding. Judging a partner solely by income, property, and academic achievements puts priorities in the wrong place. The woman earned an ordinary salary, yet set extremely high material demands for her date, being arrogant and double-standard. She viewed marriage as a one-sided bargain, expecting the man to bear all living costs without any willingness to give equally. A truly compatible partner will not keep judging and nitpicking, but understand and care for each other. High standards do not mean arrogance, and self-respect does not come from belittling others. The core of love is mutual tolerance and sincerity. Those who only calculate gains and losses can hardly gain steady, long-lasting relationships.